just a little bit bored, and I thought about in times past where I took advantage of various loopholes that I discovered, some of them quite by mistake, but once I discovered how easy it was to get away with some of these things, it became almost like a sport or a game for me to play to take advantage of these loopholes. When I was working on my PhD, I was living in Rochester, New York. My family was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and every month, 2 months, I would travel back home. And I used to be very disorganized. And one time I had traveled home and I realized I forgot to bring the charger for my laptop, and I really needed to do something on my computer. And so I went to Walmart to buy a universal laptop charger, and I was only planning on using it for a couple of days, and then I would go back to return it once I got back to Rochester. Obviously, I was very broke at the time, so I didn't want to keep it. Okay, so a few weeks later, I go back to Rochester, and I go to return the charger at the Walmart in Rochester. And when I looked at my receipt, I thought the numbers didn't seem right. And I got a lot more back than, well, not a lot more, but quite a bit more back than what I paid over in Pittsburgh. And I realized it's because they refunded the sales tax based on Rochester, New York. And the light bulb just went off. That every time I go back to Pittsburgh, I could just buy a ton of shit and then just go return it in Rochester to make a difference of, I think Pittsburgh had a 6% sales tax, Rochester had an 8%. Doesn't seem like much, but I was broke at the time, and when you consider that you could buy a ton of shit at Walmart and return it without too many pointy questions, right? I think I had a credit card with a $4,000 or $5,000 credit limit. I would go to a Walmart in Pittsburgh and max out that card buying large screen TVs or anything that I could easily return, and then go back to Rochester and return it. The other side effect I noticed of doing that was that when I had a $5,000 TV in the back of the car, I drove much more carefully. I didn't want to risk causing any damage to the TV, because that was like my life savings right there. So it had a positive side effect too. Okay, and then a year later, I didn't have a car at that time, and so I would take the Greyhound bus back home to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to go see my family, right? And one time I had gotten on the bus, and I was about to take a seat when the guy told me that there's somebody sitting there, and so without thinking much, I take a different seat, right? The bus was relatively packed this time. I think it was during the holidays. And didn't think much of it until later that trip. I noticed the guy sleeping across 2 or 3 seats, and I thought, gee, he told me that seat was taken. I think he lied to me about that to get that whole row to himself. And the light bulb went off that every time I travel, as we're boarding, because I think the bus begins in Rochester, and Wait, what was... No. You have to take a bus to Erie. The bus from Erie to Pittsburgh is the busy one. And so the bus begins in Erie, and everybody gets on, and I could just say, hey, somebody's sitting next to me, right? And so every time I took a bus, I would play that game. Another time I was taking the bus, and I was opening a package on the bus with a pair of scissors, and I had accidentally cut myself, and there was blood, and... I was sitting next to somebody, and I thought it would be nice if he moved to another seat so I could have that seat to myself. And I had accidentally cut myself. And the guy asked me, are you okay? And I explained to him that, I have HIV positive. You might want to move to that seat over there. And he made a run for it. And I had the seat to myself. And I'm recording this in May of 2020. If I were to take a bus today, I could probably get the same effect just by coughing really badly, right? Although you might get kicked off the bus too. Who knows? But I discovered how to get the seat to myself, and I called it hijacking a seat when I would do that. It was really funny. Another travel-related story is when I was working on my PhD, I had a conference one time in Rome, and when I got to the airport in Rome, my bag was nowhere to be found. And I was very upset about that, obviously. And I learned that you can make a claim for various expenses you had to pay. And I didn't think it would work, but I was bored, and I love to write sob stories anyway. And so I made up some bullshit about how I had to buy some clothing, and I made up a fake receipt. I came up with a website that on how to make fake receipts, and I wrote that I had bought some clothing and stuff like that. And I sent it in. I didn't expect anything. Lo and behold, a check for about $60 shows up. So that was nice. And I wanted to know if anybody actually looked at the receipt. So a couple years later, I took another flight to Taiwan, and we got back home, and our bags got delayed again. And so I wrote another fake receipt. But this time I wrote that I had bought a few lines of heroin, and I had picked up a prostitute. I wanted to see if anybody actually read the receipt. And the total was about $80. Lo and behold, an $80 check comes to our door. It was just really funny. Now, ever since then, every time my bags get delayed, or every time I fly, I hope my bags get delayed, just so I can write crazy shit like that. Not because I need the money nowadays, but it was funny. It was funny. Okay, another travel-related story was when I was 15 years old. My family and I had traveled to Taiwan, and one day we were about to take a bus, just a city bus, right? I think the bus fare was about 15 Taiwanese dollars, and my mom had given me $15 to put into the fare box. But when I looked, one of the coins, the $5 coin, was minted in the year 2000. I used to be fascinated with coins minted in the year 2000, just because it was the turn of the century, and I wanted to keep it. And so I substituted that for a U.S. nickel, which is about the same size, and I put it in the fare box hoping nobody would see, and I got away with it. And so for the rest of the trip, I kept using U.S. coins because they were cheaper in the fare box in Taiwan. And it was really silly. It wasn't even that much money, but just because I got away with it, I decided that would be a good idea. Okay, back to Rochester. When I was working on my PhD in Rochester, we used to have a grocery store that had gift cards that had this bug in them. What would happen is you would buy, let's say it was a $100 gift card, right? And you went. They had lots of stores, right? It was a chain. And you would spend, let's say you bought a $100 gift card, and you went to one store in the chain and you spent $80, and then you raced to another store. And you spent another $70. Apparently the computers had a little bit of a delay between when they updated that you had spent this money, and I used to love to get a gift card and just race around town, just trying to buy all the shit that I could. And what was really funny was that I would go to another store and I would beg people to let me cut in front of them because I was in such a hurry. I didn't want people to know it was because of the gift card scam, but I would make all sorts of excuses. And I remember I made it a ritual. I like to drink non-alcoholic beer, right? What I would do is every Friday night, I would go to one Wegmans store. This was Wegmans where this had happened. I think they have patched up the error. I would buy a $20 gift card, and then I would use it to buy 2 cases of beer, if I remember correctly. And then I would quickly race to another store to buy another 2 cases, and then another 2, and then another 2, until the card stopped working like 20, 30 minutes later. And I became such a mess on the road and with the people that I needed to cut in front of just to make sure the gift card didn't get turned off. And I did this for like half a year before they patched up the problem, if I remember correctly. I don't think they ever caught on that I had committed this scam, even after I still continued to shop at those stores for years after that. Nobody ever caught on that I had been running this scam for every week for like half a year. Another scam that I did, this was when I was working on my undergraduate degree. We used to have these experiments that you could participate in, and they would pay you like $10 to $20 every time for participating in some kind of psychological experiment. And one time there was this experiment that they were tracking your eye movement on a computer screen. And I used to love to scam these things and do them multiple times, using different names and sometimes dressing up a little differently, or just at different hours, so it was somebody else monitoring the exam. The funny thing was, one of the exams, they wanted to measure your blood pressure as you were doing certain tasks to see how it would affect your blood pressure. The funny thing was when I was scamming them, the second time I did it, I was nervous about being caught, so the blood pressure went crazy. I think I had like 150 over 100 or something like that. But it wasn't because of the experiment, it was because I was nervous about being caught. And so not only did they lose their money, they got really faulty data as a result. So that was really funny now looking back at it. When I was in 4th grade, I discovered, see, my parents would give me money to buy lunch at school, but I discovered that a lot of kids don't finish their lunch, and I could just ask some of my friends for their leftover food, and I could save up that money. And eventually, I saved up about, if I remember correctly, about $20 or $30 worth of change. And one time there was some kind of a sale at school, you know, everybody brought in stuff that they didn't want anymore to sell. We were raising money for something. And I went on a shopping spree as a result. Not because I wanted any of that shit, but because it was a fun experience. And my teacher was very upset when she had found out how I had came up with all that money. And she made sure to watch me buy lunch every day from then on. Which is really silly because there's a lot of food being wasted every day anyway. I would have much rather that money go to a better cause, right? Thanks for watching.